falls, truth emerges. Political cow unveils the lies. Behind the screen, wisdom surges, lighting up hate with her eyes. In the shadows, secrets lurk. She exposes, she ignites. With every post she does the work, unmasking darkness, revealing lights. Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, banishing night. With every post she does the work, unmasking darkness, revealing lights. Oh, what? Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, banishing night. Her voice cuts through, stark and raw, shattering deception, breaking the law. Icons crumble, empires fall. She stands tall, fierce and cold. Her voice echoes a thunderous call. In the chaos, her strength unfolds. False prophets scatter, truth ascends. The world watches, mesmerized. Political cow's battle never ends. In her light, dark meets its demise. Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, banishing night. At every post she does the work, unmasking darkness, revealing lights. Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, banishing night. Her voice cuts through, stark and raw, shattering deception, breaking the law. Political cow, political cow. Political cow, political cow. The beacon bright, unveiling truth, banishing night.
Thank you, Judge.
Sure.
Hey guys, let's jump into it. Trump's sentencing happened this morning. Remember that the trial was not, did not permit video or anything like that in there. In fact, there was no audio until today. I was actually surprised. I didn't realize there was going to be audio available for it. But nevertheless, there was actual audio from the meeting. So I got just some stock footage of Trump here, but the audio is the key that's going to be played behind it. And it's going to be, you know, the attorney speaking, the verdict being read out to him, and then the judge says a few words, and Trump actually takes a moment and has some comments that he wants to layer in as well. So we're going to play that, talk through it. If you got any thoughts, drop it in the chat or hit the live guest link. You can click that in through the description on this video or through this on this live stream, or if you're on mobile, go check out my bio, which is just on my channel page. I have a link to my link tree in there, and on the very first link in there is to the, you know, to join in as a guest. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get this going.
Put on the record about it. Okay, thank you. Let's impose sentence, please.
Donald Trump, you're before the court for sentence following your conviction by trial to 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Before being sentenced, the court will allow you, your attorney, and the assistant district attorney an opportunity to address the court with any matters relevant to sentencing. For the people.
Thank you. Judge, where's the preferred place for me to stand?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay. The defendant in this case, as you know, stands convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, all Class E felonies. Each carries a range of authorized sentencing options from for as much as 1 1/3 to 4 years in state prison to a variety of non-incarceratory sentences. In this court's January 3rd decision on the defendant's Clayton motion, Your Honor indicated an inclination to impose an unconditional discharge. Under all the circumstances of this case, its unique posture and the defendant's status as president.
So right off the bat, expressed its inclination to discharge any penalties, any sentencing, so forth, right? They've already indicated that in advance. It's a little weird, right? Why would they put that out there in advance? Have you ever heard of a sentencing being broadcast in advance by the judge?
The people recommend a sentence of an unconditional discharge. In finding the defendant guilty in this case, the jury necessarily found unanimously that the defendant falsified 34 separate entries in his business records with the intent to defraud, which included an intent to commit or conceal a conspiracy to promote his own election by unlawful means. Having presided over the trial, Your Honor is very familiar with the conduct, its seriousness, and the overwhelming evidence to support the jury's verdict. I'm certainly not going to rehash that now. In last week's decision on January 3rd, this court referred to the gravamen of the defendant's conduct, his criminal conduct in this case, as constituting, quote, premeditated and continuous deception. The verdict was delivered by a jury that was carefully chosen using an extensive questionnaire based on suggestions from both parties and after thorough questioning of the prospective jurors by both sides. The verdict in this case was unanimous and decisive, and it must be respected. As this court has observed, quote, the sanctity of a jury verdict and the deference that must be accorded to it is a bedrock principle in our nation's jurisprudence. The defendant's conduct before, during, and after this trial also merits consideration. Instead of preserving, protecting, and defending our constitutionally established system of criminal justice, the defendant, the once and future President of the United States, has engaged in a coordinated campaign to undermine its legitimacy. Far from expressing any kind of remorse for his criminal conduct, the defendant has purposefully bred disdain for our judicial institutions and the rule of law. And he's done this to serve his own ends and to encourage others to reject the jury verdict that he finds so distasteful.
Well, have you ever heard a judge kind of speak in this manner when kind of, I don't know, sentencing, so forth? Of course, it's not often that you have such a high-profile political case that's ongoing. But I hear the same rhetoric, the same talking points come from any given Democrat one day to the next, all over the X platform. I don't even know what that other social platform is that's out there, but all over the X platform, they're there. You hear them quite a bit using the same lines on the Tic Tac platform. But when have you ever heard somebody kind of speak in those terms in the lead up of it? But remember, they started off with the inclination of complete, just not charging, or excuse me, not sentencing him with any penalties whatsoever or jail time. And despite that, they're kind of leaning in and saying this verdict must be respected. These are serious charges. Very hypocritical. And you got to think, like, why is that? Why would you go and spend millions of dollars to try this case and yet come back and at the end of the day say there's no penalty? This was a very serious offense, but no one will be held accountable. It's bizarre.
He has characterized these proceedings as corrupt, rigged, a witch hunt, or a sham too many times to tabulate. The defendant's rhetoric has only ratcheted up since this court's rulings on his motions to dismiss. He has been unrelenting in his unsubstantiated attacks upon this court and its family, individual prosecutors and their families, the witnesses, the grand jury, the trial jury, and the justice system as a whole. The defendant has not only been held in contempt by other jurists in other matters, but this court alone.
You know, it's often the case that they say you cannot bring up other active or past, legal proceedings so that it doesn't bias the current one. I mean, that happens very often.
Found the
And yet,
defendant in
what's going on
contempt
with
for
the judge
10
here?
distinct violations of the order restricting extrajudicial speech. In his legal filings, the defendant has used dangerous rhetoric in leveling accusations of intentionally unlawful and unconstitutional conduct on the part of this court and the prosecution. As this court has noted, the defendant's conduct, quote, constitutes a direct attack on the rule of law itself. Moreover, the defendant has publicly threatened to retaliate against the prosecutors who have sought to hold him accountable in this and other matters, and the courts who have endeavored to fairly and faithfully adjudicate these matters. Such threats are designed to have a chilling effect, to intimidate those who have the responsibility to enforce our laws, in the hopes that they will ignore the defendant's transgressions because they fear that he is simply too powerful to be subjected to the same rule of law as the rest of us. In his 2024 end-of-year report, United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts warned of the dangers of such conduct. Quote, public officials, too, regrettably, have engaged in recent attempts to intimidate judges. For example, suggesting political bias in the judge's adverse rulings without credible basis for such allegations, end quote. Chief Justice Roberts continued, quote, attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. Public officials certainly have a right to criticize the work of the judiciary, but they should be mindful that intemperance in their statements when it comes to judges may prompt dangerous reactions by others. Chief Justice Roberts also spoke of the dangers of disinformation, which are, quote, magnified by social media, which provides a ready channel to instantly spread rumor and false information. Put simply, this defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system and has placed officers of the court in harm's way. In the probation report, which we just received this morning, the author, having interviewed the defendant, noted that the defendant sees himself as above the law and won't accept responsibility for his actions. And that's certainly consistent with everything else that we've seen. Now, in a typical case, both the offense conduct and these other exacerbating factors would impact the appropriate sentence. But in this case, we must be respectful of the office of the presidency and mindful of the fact that the defendant will be inaugurated as president in 10 days. Any undischarged portion of a sentence has the potential to interfere with the defendant's performance of the duties of his office. As a practical matter, the most sensible sentence prior to his inauguration is an unconditional discharge. The court has expressed an inclination to do exactly that because, in the court's words, quote, the most viable solution to ensure finality and allow.
And for folks that may have just joined, the audio was published. They have not had audio for the, for the court case in New York against Trump until today. There's finally some audio. No video, anything like that has been out there. They've had artist sketches. Reporters had to take notes and share them afterwards. But this is the actual audio that was shared this morning during the sentencing proceeding.
Options is to proceed to sentence. As you know, in New York, a conditional discharge is authorized by the penal law, quote, if the court, having regard to the nature and circumstances of the offense and to the history, character, and condition of the defendant, is of the opinion that neither the public interest nor the ends of justice would be served by a sentence of imprisonment, and that probation supervision is not appropriate. An unconditional discharge is authorized if a conditional discharge is authorized and, quote, if the court is of the opinion that no proper purpose would be served by imposing any condition upon the defendant's release. Because these crimes are felonies, the court must set forth in the record the reasons for its action. The American public has the right to a presidency unencumbered by pending court proceedings or ongoing sentence-related obligations. But imposing this sentence ensures that finality. Sentencing the defendant permits this court to enter judgment, to cement the defendant's status as a convicted felon while he pursues whatever appeals he intends to pursue. And it gives full effect and respect to the jury's verdict while preserving the defendant's ability to govern. The people therefore recommend that this court impose a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sorry, I stand corrected. That was the prosecution that's actually making that recommendation. Alvin Bragg's office.
I very much disagree with much of what the government just said about this case, about the legitimacy of what happened in this courtroom during the trial, and about President Trump's conduct fighting this case from before it was indicted, to while it was indicted, through the jury's verdict, and even to this day. What the government just said presupposes something that we disagree with very much, which was that this was an appropriate case to be brought. It was not. This case, without a doubt, knowing everything we know about the timing of the investigation, the fact that multiple prosecutors looked at the fact of this case, including prosecutors within the district attorney's office in New York County, and made a decision not to bring charges. As the court knows, shortly after President Trump announced his intention to run for re-election, this case was started for what amounted to a third time, which brings us ultimately to where we are today. A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that, and as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also on the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States. And certainly we're here for the court to sentence President Trump to an unconditional discharge. And for that, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day for President Trump and his family and friends.
Hey, Gatsu, thanks for the comment. I'd be interested in just hearing out a little bit more of your thoughts. If you have a minute, I got a link to join as a guest in the description. You can go to my bio, my link tree's in there, which also has a link for mobile to join as a guest.
In council's view, a sad day for this country, because this was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a district attorney who promised that he would go after President Trump if elected, and felt like he had to go through with that promise. And so that's sad. And I hope, and I know that President Trump shares this view, that this will never happen again in this country. And so we certainly understand where we are today. We very much intend on pursuing an appeal of this verdict and what happened during this investigation. And we certainly believe that the only appropriate sentence, if one's to be imposed at all, which we very much believe it shouldn't be, and that the case should be dismissed, is a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible
Here we go.
experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one, and none. These people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly, but they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that. Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got...
Hey, Richard, I mentioned it before. We got a link for folks to join in as a guest if they got some strong feelings around it. Sounds like you do. It's in the description. Also, you can get it on my channel page. It's in my bio for YouTube. Just click through for, you can do it on mobile or on your laptop or what have you. But some interesting feedback from the group here.
No standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington. But he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and
Hey, what's going on, Richard Beck? So there was specific use of language that impacts my live stream. I'm just trying to abide by the the community guidelines that have been set out by the platform. But if you do have more thoughts, totally welcome to share them with the group.
Attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on. I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, you appear before this court today to conclude this criminal proceeding by the imposition of sentence. Although I have taken the unusual step of informing you in advance of my inclinations, before imposing sentence, I believe it is important for you, as well as those observing these proceedings, to understand my reasoning for the sentence I am about to impose. The imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. Our legislature sets the parameters for an authorized sentence, but it is a judge that must decide what constitutes a just conclusion to a verdict of guilty. A court is vested with broad discretion in determining what sources or evidence it may consider to arrive at an appropriate sentence. In doing so, the court must consider the facts of the case along with any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. In my time on the bench, I've been called upon to grapple with this weighty responsibility for countless defendants who have been found guilty after trial for an assortment of offenses, ranging from nonviolent Class E felonies to the most heinous of crimes, including homicides, sex trafficking, and child sexual abuse. The task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration, whether the sentence be an unconditional discharge or incarceration of 25 years to life. However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. Indeed, it can be viewed fairly that this has been a truly extraordinary case. There was unprecedented media attention, public interest, and heightened security involving various agencies. And yet, the trial was a bit of a paradox because once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial itself was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than the other 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same exact time. Jury selection was conducted, the same rules of evidence were followed, opening statements were made, witnesses called and cross-examined, evidence presented, summations delivered, the same burden of proof was applied, and a jury made up of ordinary citizens delivered a verdict. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure and guided by the law. Of course, part of what made it feel somewhat ordinary was the outstanding work, preparation, and professionalism of the clerks, court officers, court reporters, security personnel, and the entire staff of this building who did their jobs as they would with any other criminal trial. So while one can argue that the trial itself was in many respects somewhat ordinary, the same cannot be said about the circumstances surrounding this sentencing. And that is because of the office you once occupied and which you will soon occupy again. To be sure, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. The legal protections, especially within the context of a criminal prosecution, afforded to the office of the President have been laid out by our founders, the Constitution, and most recently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court in the matter of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1st, 2024. As with every other defendant in your position, it is my obligation to consider any and all aggravating and mitigating factors to inform my decision. Some of those aggravating factors have already been articulated in my Sandoval ruling at the start of this trial and by my recent written decisions on December 16th and January 3rd. Thus, they need not be repeated at this time. However, the considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the office of the Chief Executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, the protections afforded the office of the President are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce,
Yeah, hey guys, just jumping in here, just watching some of the chat. The zombie Call of Duty feller, I don't know. It doesn't seem like you're a super happy kind of situation at the moment, but thank you for kind of letting everyone know how you feel about the situation. Let's bring out Darren here. Tell some more lies, Trump. Whole world is laughing at you, King Bumpy. I'm not sure what King Bumpy is. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then we have another one, independent, famous scumbag Trump, professional liar. Interesting that all of a sudden we've got like a ton of folks that are hitting the poll, because it was a lot more folks siding on the miscarriage of justice than, or at this point, than saying that these were politically driven charges, which kind of interesting. Independent says, see, everybody knows about the lying. You know, the bottom line, and well, let's let the judge complete his thoughts here. He's just gotten that a couple minutes ago. And again, this is just audio that was published. They haven't had audio this entire time. Just today popped up. I don't know if they're looking for sound bites to close things out. I'm not sure why or what the reasoning was. I wasn't expecting it. But the audio that was published, they haven't let cameras in throughout the duration of the trial. It was just, you know, the sketches that you usually see and people, you know, taking notes in the room, reporters and so forth. But let him close out his thoughts here.
Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No, ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the office of the president that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause and presidential immunity. It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence. After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree. Therefore, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts. Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office. Thank you.
And that's it, folks. Literally. The judge closes it out with Godspeed. And that's it. Unconditional discharge. You know, from state to state, some of these legal definitions, not that I'm extremely well versed in the legal system or what have you, they change in how they term things, but unconditional discharge. So this entire time that they were making a fuss, and I'm talking about the liberals, the leading candidates on the liberal side of things, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they've made such a big fuss out of these charges, you know, making sure you understood the number of felonies associated with it, the gravity of the situation, and how significant of a crime this was. And at the end of the day, what's the penalty? It's an unconditional discharge. And this whole time they're saying that there's no way they're going to have a two-tiered justice system. Nobody's above the law. All those talking points that you'd expect to hear were out there, and now liberals have taken another blow as Trump has received an unconditional discharge. This will get appealed. There's a lot of mechanical issues along the way with how this trial had proceeded, the instructions that were given to the jury, asking them to find some sort of a misdemeanor and so that they can elevate the crimes that were committed. But at the end of the day, I mean, regardless of how you feel about his personal behavior and actions, at the end of the day, accountants in a business categorized a scope of work that was given to an attorney, and they have expenses associated with that. They called that scope legal expenses, and that was politicized. Somebody got the bright idea, like, hey, maybe that should be a business expense, not a legal expense. Like, what kind of business expense are you talking about? They claimed it should have been categorized differently, and somehow charges came out. So restatements, corrections, people, I mean, these are people doing these things. It's human nature, right? You're not going to get perfection out of it. If this is the standard, every Fortune 500 company is, every executive is subject to litigation at this point, because, the thousands of people that may support their finance and accounting departments, maybe they just missed something. And now they're subject to a criminal penalty. That's the bizarre part of all this to me, is they're trying to make a linkage of criminality, of his personal behavior, to this trial, which that's not the case. They always called it, the hush money, but it was more just like a bookkeeping type thing that they were trying to jump on him about. So the whole thing was really blown out of proportion. At the very end, you could see the judge gave kind of a lightweight ending to it. There wasn't much in terms of, I hope you've learned your lesson and so forth. He just kind of let it go. Okay, election's over. I guess I, did my part. Now we got to move on, right? So Nathaniel mentioned this was a political hit. I feel that was exactly what would happen, or what happened here. Which is unfortunate, because each time an action like this takes place, it sets precedents, right? It sets precedents for what's to come in the future. And I hope that it doesn't continue. I hope that it stops, that this is like a one and done, but I have no idea. It feels like this may have become a new normal, unfortunately. Just scanning some of the chats in here. So anyway, that was just put out there this morning. I do want to go back to a topic that we reviewed last night real quick, if I can, because I got some new info, and we were looking at the the awful fires that had taken place. Let me make this screen a little bit bigger. Hang on one sec, guys. Just switching over. Share. There we go. All right. I just want to play one more clip, because we had been talking about how people's insurance was canceled, and it's a bit of a mystery. Like, why were they canceled, in the months before this thing? And I think that this clip here, and if you want to see these stream notes here, just go to politicalaccount.com. I've got all the links from each of the streams in here. Here we go. I thought this was a very nice explanation to kind of walk through the scenario of what's going on there with the insurance companies.
State Farm non-renewed 69% of the policies it had in Pacific Palisades. Data point this morning confirmed. State Farm said last year, we're non-renewing 69% of the homes we insure currently today in Palisades. Why? Long-term brush risk and poor management of the common area.
You can't blame them.
No,
I'm not blaming them. I know you're not, but what I'm saying is you cannot blame. The business has to make profits, and when the regulators make their life a living hell and make them look bad, what do you want us to do? Take a loss every year?
Well, correct. Now I'm going to the punchline. Why did they do that? Because the county of LA and the city of LA had suspended brush removal in Palisades. This comes down to the county.
Are you joking?
Yeah, you can find it. You can find it was suspended here. Casual brush removal suspended here. Limited brush removal suspended here. This is all going to come out because Zach Levi
That's
and
when
other
Trump
people.
said he got to clean the floor, and the floor.
That's exactly right. And who did, by the way, to his credit, what do you say? You said, get smarter people in the room with you.
Yeah.
Who did he praise? You know, the people in Finland have had policies and they've been doing this for a while.
Right.
So he's not saying, hey, I'll fix it. He's saying, you know, this problem has been solved.
There's another case study. We have it. They did it. Why don't we learn from them and fix it?
That's exactly right. And so I'm not down on the insurance companies. I'm saying the insurance companies are at the bottom of the waterfall, and at the top of the waterfall is the state with their policies and budget cuts on fire and brush suppression and all the things that they've done, despite the level of taxes they're collecting. And now they collect the tax. They have the money. Prices of homes are way up, so property tax is up. But what are they doing with the money? Homeless programs, sanctuary city programs are wasting the money on non-citizen spends. Citizen spends, you're keeping the valleys and the areas clear of brush, and you're working on that. Non-citizen spend, you have all these pet DEI projects. That's the upstream problem. The money was spent on other stuff.
So let's take a quick look as a reminder of these budget cuts. Let me make sure you guys could see this in frame. Okay, that looks good. So a lot of this stuff is coming out. Everything here is public record, right? This is an official correspondence from fire chief in Los Angeles to the Board of Fire Commissioners demanding that $7 million that were reduced from their budget be restored. You know, in this case, it went to overtime. In fact, this is just one instance. I think overall they tallied it up. It was over 20 million had been cut from the budget for firefighters. And so this budget reduction directly impacted, as they're stating here, their ability to maintain core operations, not do anything new, not go get drones to do this stuff for them, but just the core operations and services to take care of the communities that are, you know, in their care would not be able to happen if this 7 million was cut, and fell on deaf ears, right? And literally, if you look at this document was dated December 4th, not that long ago. And here we are now in the current state of affairs. So when they talk about the insurance company, it's clicking. They saw that these budget cuts were happening. They knew the dangers of how quickly things can get out of control. And in their minds, they're like, we're going to go bankrupt if we insure these places because the city and the state are not doing their part. And what happened? And yet you have Gavin Newsom coming out here for photo ops, standing in front of the fire and everything.
What is the situation with the water? Obviously, in Palisades, ran out last night in the hydrants. I was talking to the firefighter in this block. They left because there was no water in the hydrant here.
The local folks are trying to figure that out. I mean, just when you have a system that's not dissimilar to what we've seen in other extraordinarily large-scale fires, whether it be pipe, electricity, or whether it just be the complete overwhelm of the system. I mean, those hydrants are typical for 2 or 3 fires, maybe one fire. You have something at this scale, but again, that's going to be determined by the local.
That's got to be determined by the local municipality or excuse me, the local leadership in counties and so forth. So passing the buck, right? There's elements that go local, you know, all the way up to the state in terms of decision making. You know, not that long ago, Trump was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was very critical of how water was being diverted from these areas. It caused a lot of, you know, a lot of the trees, a lot of the areas that were not turned into residential communities, but a lot of that area became very dry, and they're in drought scenarios because they diverted the water away, and it actually was being directed into the Pacific Ocean. Because of environmental impact reasons. The details on that I've been looking at, and I don't feel comfortable with what I've seen out there to, you know, kind of call it out in too much detail, but there were decision points here that they had at their disposal. Now he's kind of pushing this back onto the city, saying it's their fault. You know, they make different decisions. But you look at this background and you look at how aloof he is with Anderson Cooper here, asking him questions. It's like he doesn't care. And yet he's here for the photo op. Like, I braved the fire with everybody. No, you didn't. They absolutely did not. You had the team bring you in there nice and safe. probably had his own like oxygen mask on the side when they're not recording, and then he leaves. Other people would have loved to have had that luxury that were there. And then the other thing I'll reiterate from last night as well is that a number of folks were saying, hey, these are very wealthy people. They can deal with it. They lost their $1 million home, multi-million-dollar home. They've got enough money. That's no big deal. That may have been a case with, some of the homes and some of the very wealthy people that were in that area. But there's a lot of other folks, a considerable number of folks, that just the nature of the housing market, because of the dot-com boom, and then the continued acceleration of technology after that, the price of housing in California has jumped astronomically. So they may have in the 90s and the 80s purchased those homes at reasonable prices, right? So they bought a house for 100 grand in the 80s or whatever it was, and for whatever reason, it's $2 million today. Well, actually, we know exactly why. Location's everything. So they're sitting on a $2 million house, and yet that's not what they bought it for. It's not like their life circumstances changed significantly. They just happen to, fall into the grips of the market. And so that's the real tragedy here, is that it's going to be largely ignored for those folks that actually do need support. And because their houses were valued so high, what is the government, what is the state going to do for them? They already had their insurance coverage cut. What's next? So that's to be seen. But the clip that was there, I thought was an interesting one. Again, politicalcow.com. I've got this document. I'm continuing kind of digging to find some other ones as well. But there's commentary from different folks here that are at the event. There's this local resident that caught Gavin Newsom, started calling him out as they were recording. Sky News was the one that published that. I haven't found it anywhere else on other media outlets. It actually had to come from Sky News. But in any case, the last thing I'll add to this is it makes you really think now, after Biden held his press conference and talked about how they are going to cover 100% of the cost for the state. What about North Carolina? They're not having 100% of that state's costs covered. There are elements of the plans for California that are going to go to residents. What's going on with North Carolina? What about Maui? Why is California being given priority here? Right? You think of major donors, everything, the wealth, the consistency and voting record of the state. Hawaii, I believe, has also been liberal for a very long time, but they're not as big of a donor. If you look at my channel a bit further down, I have a video where I walked through a Kamala Harris rally that happened in Houston, and they had a specific area that was very empty. Otherwise, it was really packed in there, but the very empty section was reserved for folks that had made significant donations. And so there is that tiering system that you see all over the place that is accepted in the Democrat Party. I guess they're now the party of the wealthy and the rich, and yet they proclaim to be the opposite. Who's actually concerned with labor? The Teamsters Union on the Tucker Carlson podcast absolutely obliterated the Biden administration's record, saying that day one they destroyed 7,000 jobs that were union jobs because of the executive orders they signed, and the downward trend continued from there. They didn't make their commitments of shoring up pensions or anything like that for the unions, and so it comes to that point where people are realizing that the Democrat Party has turned into something else. They're actually not liberal at all. The real liberals now are actually the Republicans. Republicans are now the new liberals, literally, because of how far left the Democrat Party has gone. Although I can't say it's really gone far left. They're all over the place, to be honest. But all right, so just wanted to do a quick stream right now. Quick stream. Yep, running at right about an hour. I appreciate you guys joining in. Thank you for that. We've had about just under 16,000 folks come through. So thank you for that. Like, subscribe, take a look at the link I have pinned. It's also in the description of the live stream. I got a 40% discount now for Ground News if you guys want to sign up for their Vantage plan. Give you full access to all their features. Check that out. I use that to research a lot of my content. You can bring together a lot of sources around a given topic and then see how the bias is getting, weighed in there. They help provide ratings for different media outlets. And if you actually don't agree with one of their ratings, like for instance, if they say that CNN is a right-leaning publication, they allow you to change that. And so for you, it becomes personalized, and you could say, actually, I don't agree with that. And they look at that stuff and take that into consideration, right? This is a small grassroots company. It's not a major media outlet that created Ground News. It's a small grassroots company, and that is their aim to, bring more visibility across the spectrum, give people the full picture, and give them tools and data to go off of. So it brings things together very quickly. You don't have to go out there and, search and scan for a dozen articles. Their AI on the news service also aggregates, some talking points around the story for you, and you can ask it questions as well. So really good stuff. Check out the links on that. And just checking out Mr. Fox. Gavin Newsom. It's no bueno. And then, yeah, that's, they really did a number on California. And yet the interesting thing is there's people still, even the ones that have been impacted, saying, oh, well, that's just what happens with climate change. We got to address climate change. So good luck with that, guys. As a lot of people are realizing, even though this tragedy has happened, it may not have significantly influenced the vote in California. But all right, guys, I'm going to close it out, hit my hour mark. So thanks again. We'll be back online soon. Like, subscribe, check out my latest videos. And hey, send me some feedback. I didn't get anybody that wanted to join in the live stream, but if you want to jump in, express your opinions in future live streams, I'll have guest links on there in the future as well. All right. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the theme song.
Darkness falls, truth emerges, political cow unveils the lies. Behind the screen, wisdom surges, lighting up hate with her eyes. In the shadows, secrets lurk. She exposes, she ignites. With every post she does the work, unmasking darkness, revealing lights. Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, banishing night. With every post she does the work, unmasking darkness, revealing lights. Oh, what political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, vanishing night. Her voice cuts through, stark and raw, shattering deception, breaking the law. Icons crumble, empires fall. She stands tall, fierce and cold. Her voice echoes a thunderous call. In the chaos, her strength unfolds. False prophets scatter, truth ascends. The world watches, mesmerized. Political cows, battle never ends. In her light, dark meets its demise. Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, vanishing night. At every post, she does the work, unmasking darkness, revealing lights. Political cow, the beacon bright, unveiling truth, vanishing night. Her voice cuts through, stark and raw, shattering deception, breaking the law.